The dawn came slow that morning, spilling over the plains in ribbons of gold and crimson. The world was still, except for the restless whisper of wind brushing through the dry grass. Inside a small wooden barn at the edge of the valley, Elias Carter woke to the sound of hoofbeats in his dreams. His hands, scarred from years of work, still ached from the night before, the night he had saved a stranger. Her name was Ayanna, a young native girl he'd found bleeding near the creek, an arrow broken in her shoulder. He didn't ask questions then. He only knew that she needed help. He'd brought her to his barn, stitched her wound with trembling hands, and stayed awake by the lantern until she could breathe easy again. Now, as the first light touched her face, Elias realized something. Saving her might have changed his life forever. Ayanna stirred, her dark eyes opening slowly. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered, voice hoarse but steady. Elias frowned. "Wasn't much of a choice. You'd have died out there." She looked away, her expression unreadable. "They will come." Before he could ask who they were, the sound came faint at first, like thunder miles away. Then it grew louder. The earth began to tremble. Elias stepped outside, heart pounding, and there they were, across the open plain. A line of riders stretched as far as his eyes could see, 100 native warriors, their horses glinting in the morning sun, feathers and spears rising like a storm. Elias froze. His barn, his entire life, seemed to shrink beneath the weight of that sight. Ayanna came to the door behind him, clutching her wounded shoulder. "They are my people," she said quietly, "and they believe you've taken me." Elias turned, his breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean, taken you?" Her eyes filled with sorrow. "They think you've kidnapped me, and they do not forgive easily." The riders halted at the edge of his land. Their leader, an older man with braids streaked in gray, raised his hand. His face was painted in red and white, his gaze sharp as an eagle's. A horn sounded, echoing across the valley. Elias felt his blood turn cold. He had done a good thing, a decent thing. But out here in the Old West, kindness often carried a cost. The line of warriors began to move forward, slow and deliberate, their shadows stretching long across the dirt. Elias could hear his own heartbeat. He glanced back at Ayanna, who stood pale and trembling. "Then, I guess," he muttered, reaching for his old rifle. "It's time we explain what really happened." The morning wind carried dust and tension in equal measure. The 100 riders had stopped, but their silence was louder than war drums. The air between Elias Carter's barn and the open plain was heavy like a rope pulled too tight. Elias stood just outside his barn, rifle in hand, trying not to let his fear show. His heart was pounding so loud it almost drowned out the rustle of the horses. He'd seen trouble before: bandits, bounty hunters, even Union soldiers passing through after the war, but nothing like this. Ayanna stepped forward, her bare feet brushing the dirt, her wound still bandaged with Elias's torn shirt. "Don't raise your weapon," she said quietly. "If you do, they'll strike without a word." Elias looked at her, jaw clenched. "And if I don't, they'll still think I stole you." Before she could answer, one of the warriors broke from the line and galloped forward. Dust swirled around his horse as he pulled up just a few feet away. His face was young but hardened, his chest marked with paint and scars. He looked down at Elias with cold, accusing eyes. "You," the warrior barked. White man, you took her. Elias lowered his rifle slightly, his voice calm but firm. She was bleeding out by the creek. I only helped. The young warrior's expression didn't change. Our chief demands her return. Now. Elias turned to Ayanna. Her hands were trembling. Tell them, girl, he said softly. Tell them I meant no harm. But she didn't speak. Instead, she lowered her gaze. I can't, she whispered. The words hit Elias like a hammer. You can't. What in God's name do you mean you can't? She took a step back, pain flashing in her eyes. If I speak for you, they'll say I've turned against my blood. My father leads them. The one who raised that horn, he's their chief. Elias blinked, realization dawning. Your father. She nodded. Chief 10 Bears. Elias swore under his breath. The same 10 Bears whose name was whispered across the territories, known for leading raids against settlers who crossed native lands. A man of honor, but also of wrath. The young warrior raised his hand. Enough talk. She returns now. Elias's fingers brushed the trigger of his rifle, though he kept it lowered. You tell your chief, he said, his voice steady but cold. He can have her back once I know she's safe. She nearly died last night, and I'm not about to send her out bleeding again. The warrior's nostrils flared. For a moment, Elias thought he might draw his blade right there. But then the man turned his horse sharply and rode back to the line. Ayanna looked at Elias, her voice shaking. You don't understand, Elias. He'll take that as an insult. Elias let out a dry laugh. Lady, I've been insulted by outlaws, sheriffs, and the damn government. I'll survive one more. But in truth, he wasn't sure. Out on the plain, Chief 10 Bears raised his arm. A single war cry split the air, echoing through the valley. The horses shifted restlessly. The warriors' hands went to their weapons. Ayanna clutched Elias's arm. They're preparing to attack. Elias's gaze hardened. He took a step back toward the barn door, voice low but calm. Then we better make this place worth fighting for. The sun climbed higher, burning through the morning mist. The line of warriors began to spread out, forming a crescent around the barn. Elias chambered around, the metallic click echoing like a death knell. It was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a siege. The sun had risen high, turning the valley into a furnace of light and heat. Every sound, the flap of a horse's ear, the crack of a dry twig, felt sharper, louder, more alive. Elias Carter stood at the heart of it all. His barn now a fortress built of weathered wood and desperation. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of hay and gun oil. He'd barred the doors with thick beams, stacked barrels near the windows for cover, and counted what little ammunition he had left. 15 rounds. Maybe 16 if he dug through the old drawer near his workbench. Not enough to face 100 men. Ayanna sat by the small table, her wound freshly dressed, her face pale but determined. You can't fight them, Elias, she said. You'll die before the sun sets. Elias gave her a weary grin. Wouldn't be the first time someone said that to me. He loaded his rifle slowly, his fingers steady, his mind racing. Tell me something, he said, glancing at her. Why were you out there alone last night? What were you running from? Ayanna hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward the window, where the distant warriors still waited like shadows in the heat. My tribe was attacked, she said softly. Not by settlers, by another tribe. I was sent to warn my father, but I never made it. I thought your land was empty when I fell." Elias frowned. "So you weren't running from me. You were running to him." She nodded. "And now he believes you took me prisoner." Outside, a sudden call cut through the air, a deep, throaty cry, followed by the thundering of hooves. Elias ran to the small window slit and looked out. A group of riders was breaking away from the main line, galloping toward the barn. "They're coming," he barked. He lifted his rifle, aimed through the slit, and fired once. The shot rang out like thunder. One of the horses stumbled, throwing its rider to the ground. The others veered off, circling wide and firing arrows in return. Shafts struck the barn walls, splintering wood, shaking the beams. Elias ducked back, reloading. "Guess that answers whether they want to talk." Ayanna crouched beside him, fear flashing in her eyes. "My father won't stop. He believes you dishonored his blood." Elias exhaled sharply, sweat dripping down his brow. "Then maybe it's time to change his mind." He moved fast, dragged a table against the door, kicked open a trap hatch in the floor he'd built years ago for storing grain. "Down there," he said. "You'll be safe." But Ayanna shook her head. "If you die defending me, it will only prove their belief. Let me go. Let me speak to him." Elias looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You step outside, they'll shoot before you take 2 steps. Maybe," she said softly, "but they're still my people. They'll listen if I remind them who I am." Outside, another arrow struck the wall, missing Elias's head by inches. He cursed under his breath. Then he looked at her again, this young woman caught between 2 worlds, willing to risk everything to stop bloodshed. "You're either the bravest soul I've ever met," he said, "or the most foolish." "Maybe both," she replied with a faint smile. He took a deep breath and nodded. "All right then. But if anything happens to you," she interrupted, her tone firm, "you've already done enough. Whatever happens now is on me." Elias opened the barn door a few inches, just enough for Ayanna to slip out. The sunlight poured in like fire. She stepped into it slowly, hands raised high, her hair catching the wind. The warriors on the ridge stirred, lowering their bows as she walked toward them. The valley fell silent again, the kind of silence that holds its breath before the storm inside. Elias watched from the shadows, rifle ready. He didn't trust silence. Not in the Old West. Not when the world could turn against a man for doing the right thing. The wind held its breath. Ayanna walked slowly across the scorched earth, her hands lifted high, her steps steady but unsure. Every heartbeat echoed through the valley. Each stride was a choice between peace and war. Behind her, Elias watched from the barn window, his rifle still raised but unmoving. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something heavier. He had fought outlaws, thieves, even his own past, but never a battle like this. This one wasn't about bullets or land. It was about trust. The circle of warriors parted as Ayanna reached them. The chief, her father, 10 Bears, sat tall on his horse, wrapped in a dark buffalo hide, feathers swaying gently in the dry breeze. His face was carved with age and grief, eyes sharp as blades. Ayanna knelt before him, pressing her hand to the dust. "Father," she said softly, "you have been deceived." 10 Bears' gaze hardened. "You were taken by a white man. Now you stand here, alive, speaking his tongue, wearing his cloth. How am I deceived? Ayana raised her eyes. He saved me. When others would have left me to die, he carried me to his home and healed my wound. The murmurs among the warriors grew louder. Ten Bear's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened around his spear. And what price did he ask for this kindness? None, she answered firmly. He asked for nothing. He didn't even know my name. Ten Bears was silent for a long time. His eyes drifted toward the barn, a small, stubborn mark of civilization standing against the wild. Our people have seen mercy turn to chains before, he said. Our daughters taken under the same words. I cannot risk my blood for a man's story. Ayana stepped closer. Then risk it for mine. Look at me, father. I wear no chains. I bear no shame. The blood on his hands is not mine, it is his own, from the fight to save me. The chief looked at her not as a leader now, but as a father. His jaw tightened. His heart wavered at the barn. Elias could only see shadows moving in the sun. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the tension in their movements. Every instinct told him to act, to prepare for a fight. Yet something deep inside whispered to stay still. Then, from the ridge, a lone rider suddenly appeared, not part of Ten Bear's band. The stranger wore the paint of another tribe, the Crow, enemies of the Cheyenne. He rode hard, shouting in their native tongue. Elias couldn't understand, but Ayana did. Her face went pale. Father, she cried. They followed me. The chief turned sharply as the messenger stopped before him. The Crow are near, the man shouted. 50 riders, maybe more. They come for the girl and the white man's land. The warriors erupted into chaos, voices rising like thunder. Elias stepped out from the barn, rifle in hand, his gut telling him what was coming. 10 Bears met his eyes across the distance. 2 men, 2 worlds bound by one danger. They'll be here before the sun falls, Elias called out. You can fight me, or you can fight them. But if we fight both, we all die. A tense silence followed, the air thick as tar. Finally, 10 Bears dismounted, his boots sinking into the dust. You speak truth, white man, he said. Today, we are not enemies. Ayana's eyes glistened with relief. Elias nodded slowly. Then let's get ready. The warriors began to form a line, turning their horses toward the east, where the Crow war cries echoed faintly in the wind. Elias hurried back to the barn, throwing open the doors. He wasn't alone anymore, for now they were allies. For the first time in years, the land around Carter's barn wasn't divided by race or blood. It was united by survival. And as the sun began its slow descent, Elias knew the real battle was only beginning. The sky bled red as the sun dipped low, washing the valley in a fiery glow. The heat had eased, but the air was thick, charged with the promise of violence. From the eastern hills came the faint thunder of hooves. The Crow warriors were coming. Elias Carter stood beside Chief 10 Bears and Ayana near the barn, watching the dust clouds rising in the distance. Every second stretched thin as wire. The old cowboy checked his rifle, then the revolver at his belt. He had only a few bullets left, but he'd faced worse odds. 10 Bears' men moved with precision, spreading out across the ridge, their horses restless, their spears gleaming in the dying light. They were born for this land, born to fight upon it. Elias had fought for survival all his life, But these men, they fought for legacy. Ayana's voice was low but steady. They'll strike fast. The crow used the wind. They attack with the sun behind them. Elias smirked faintly. Guess we better make sure the sun blinds them first. He hurried to the barn, pulling down the wooden shutters and scattering piles of hay soaked in oil near the fence. When the crow came close, he planned to light them. The smoke and flames would mask their movement and maybe turn fear into confusion. 10 bears watched him work, his expression unreadable. You fight like a man who's lost much. Elias didn't look up. You fight like a man who still has something to lose. That earned him the faintest nod from the chief. Moments later, the crow appeared, dark shapes riding hard out of the glare, their war cries slicing the silence. They moved like a storm, arrows flashing, dust swirling. Elias felt the old rush, the cold, sharp calm that came when death was near. He lifted his rifle, took a breath, and fired. The first shot dropped a rider. The second hit another's horse, sending both crashing to the ground. The Cheyenne warriors answered with a volley of arrows, their voices rising in fierce rhythm. The battle had begun. Flames burst up along the fence line as Elias threw a torch into the oil-soaked hay. Smoke poured into the air, thick and choking. The wind carried it toward the crow riders, breaking their charge. Horses screamed, stumbling through the haze. The barn glowed orange against the firelight, a beacon of resistance. Ayana moved among the fighters, tending wounds, shouting directions. She was no longer the frightened girl from the creek. She was the daughter of a chief. Standing between two worlds and commanding both, Elias reloaded, ducking behind the barn wall as an arrow whizzed past his head. He heard a voice behind him, 10 bears, calling orders in his native tongue. The old chief fought like a spirit of the plains, his spear flashing through the smoke, his horse darting between flames. Then Elias saw it through the haze, a crow warrior aiming straight for Ayana. The man rode hard, his blade raised high. Elias didn't think. He ran forward, firing from the hip. The shot hit true. The warrior fell, tumbling into the dirt at Ayana's feet. She turned, wide. "You saved me again." Elias gave her a grim smile. "Let's hope I don't make a habit of it." But even as they caught their breath, the battle raged on. More crow riders poured from the east. The ground shook with their charge. The Cheyenne line wavered. They were outnumbered, pushed toward the barn. Elias looked around at the wounded, the smoke, the fire catching along his roof. "If we hold here, we'll burn alive," he muttered. 10 bears rode up beside him, his face streaked with sweat and ash. "Then we take the fight to them." Together, the cowboy and the chief, they led a final charge. Elias mounted a stray horse, gripping his rifle in one hand, reins in the other. The warriors followed, shouting their cries into the burning dusk. They met the crow in a clash of dust and fury, steel against steel, echoing across the valley like thunder. By the time the sun sank below the horizon, the ground was littered with fallen men and broken weapons. The crow had retreated, defeated, scattered back into the wilderness. The battle for the valley was over. Elias slid off his horse, his legs trembling, his breath ragged. Smoke curled above the barn, half-burned, but still standing. 10 bears looked at him, then extended his hand. "You fought with honor, white man." The spirits saw. Elias gripped his hand firmly. Wasn't honor, chief, just survival. Ayana smiled faintly. Sometimes that's the same thing. The night settled heavy and quiet around them. The war drums were silent now. Only the crackle of embers remained, and a strange peace between enemies who'd fought side by side. The night was long and quiet. The fire had burned itself down to glowing embers, their light flickering weakly across the valley floor. The air still smelled of smoke and blood, the bitter perfume of survival. Elias Carter sat on a broken fence post, hat resting in his hands, staring into the dying flames. He'd seen enough death for 10 lifetimes. He'd fought in the war, buried friends, and learned the hard way that peace was a fragile thing. But tonight felt different. Tonight, peace didn't come from victory. It came from understanding. Yana moved silently through the camp, tending to the wounded. She was exhausted, her clothes torn, her hair streaked with ash. Yet her eyes shone with something new, a quiet strength that even war couldn't burn away. She stopped beside Elias and handed him a flask of water. "You fought bravely," she said softly. Elias gave a tired chuckle. "I fought stupidly. Brave men die. Lucky ones just make it through." Ayana smiled faintly. "Then maybe luck favors the ones who do good." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth twitching. "You always talk like someone older than me." "I had to grow fast," she said, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Our people don't get the luxury of waiting to be wise." A moment of silence passed between them. Then 10 Bears approached, his silhouette outlined by the last glow of fire. He looked weary but proud, a leader who had lost much and yet gained something unexpected. "You fought with us when you could have run," the chief said. "You bled for a people not your own. That is rare among your kind." Elias stood slowly, nodding with respect. "You saved my life to chief. Guess that makes us even." 10 Bears shook his head. "No, it makes us brothers." For a man like Elias, words like that carried more weight than gold. He felt something shift deep inside him, the kind of peace he hadn't known since before the war. No bounty, no land deed, no coin could ever buy this. A second chance. The chief raised his hand to the rising dawn. "The crow will not return soon, but neither will we stay. This land is soaked with spirits now. We will move north to where the water runs free." Elias nodded. "Then I'll rebuild here. Maybe plant corn again. Maybe sleep for once." Ayana stepped closer. "You'll stay alone." He smiled faintly. "Solitude suits me. But I reckon you'll visit. Someone's gotta make sure I don't burn the barn down again." She laughed softly, a sound that melted the heaviness of the moment. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'll bring a few warriors with me next time, just to keep you humble." Elias chuckled, tipping his hat. "Wouldn't expect anything less." As the sun rose over the valley, light spilled across the battered land, over fallen arrows, broken fences, and faces marked by both pain and pride. The barn still stood, scarred but strong. Much like the man who owned it, 10 Bears and his warriors rode out at dawn, their silhouettes fading into the golden haze. Ayana looked back once, just once, her eyes meeting Ilias's across the field. Then she turned and followed her people. Elias watched until the last horse disappeared behind the ridge. He took a deep breath, the air cool and clean. For the first time in years, the valley felt alive again. He walked back toward the barn, sunlight glinting off his rifle. The past had taken enough from him. The future, well, that was his to build now. As he reached the doorway, he paused, looking out at the endless stretch of land. The wind moved through the grass like an old friend. Elias smiled to himself. The west was still wild, but maybe, just maybe, there was room in it for men who did the right thing, even when it cost them everything.